Hello and welcome to this video lesson on English Lesson 1 from Class 10 textbook First Flight. The name of the lesson is A Letter to God. I am Aviral Khurana, TGT English, Kendriya Vidyalaya, Babina Cant, presenting this lesson to you. As the name suggests, A Letter to God is about a letter that is written by a poor farmer to God who seeks some help from him. The author of the lesson is G.L. Fentis. Before we read, let us go through the introduction given before the lesson. They say faith can move mountains, but what should we put our faith in? This is the question this story delicately poses. Lencho is a farmer who writes a letter to God when his crops are ruined, asking for 100 pesos. Does Lencho's letter reach God? Does God send him the money? Think what your answers to these questions would be, and guess how the story continues before you begin to read it. The theme of the story is immense faith in God. Students, faith can actually move mountains. Faith and hope are the fuel of life. If you have faith in yourself, faith in your destiny, and faith in God, remember, all your hard work will always be very meaningful. Let us begin with reading the chapter. The house, the only one in the entire valley, sat on the crest of a low hill. From this height, one could see the river and the field of ripe corn, dotted with the flowers that always promised a good harvest. The only thing the earth needed was a downpour or at least a shower. Throughout the morning, Lencho, who knew his fields intimately, had done nothing else but see the sky towards the northeast. Now, the setting of the story is rustic. The story has been set in a village. Lencho is a farmer, and the location of his house has been described. His house was the only one in the entire valley. The house sat on the crest of a low hill. From this height, one could see the river, and there was also a field of ripe corn that had flowers among the corn plant. There was always a good harvest from this field. Now, what was needed was a heavy rain or a shower or a drizzle to make the crop and the plants bloom. Now, Lencho, in the best of his hopefulness, was hoping for rain, and that is why he was looking towards the sky. He wanted God to give some raindrops to the burning earth so that the crops would get water and the crops would grow. And that is how Lencho will be able to earn bread for his family. Now we are really going to get some water, woman? The woman who was preparing supper replied, Yes, God willing. The older boys were working in the field while the smaller ones were playing near the house until the woman called to them all, Come for dinner! We know that Lencho is talking to his wife, and as soon as he sees some clouds in the sky, he begins to get really hopeful. He, with joy, calls his wife and tells her that there's going to be some water, there's going to be some rain after all. The woman who was preparing supper reacts to this news very happily. The older boys were working in the field. We can be sure of the fact that these boys are Lencho's sons. The smaller boys were playing near the house until they were called for dinner. While they were having their meal, just as Lencho had predicted, there were big drops of rain that began to fall. Lencho's joy knew no bounds. In the northeast, huge mountains of clouds could be seen approaching. The air was fresh and sweet. The man went out for no other reason than to have the pleasure of feeling the rain on his body. But, students, this pleasure does not just denote pleasure of cool raindrops touching his body, but also the contentment of a farmer who was happy to see that his crops were getting enough water from the rain. When he returned, he exclaimed, "These aren't raindrops falling from the sky, they are new coins. The big drops are 10-cent pieces and the little ones are fives." We can imagine the joy of this farmer. The farmer thinks that it was only water that was needed for his crops now to let him earn bread for the coming season. Seeing these raindrops, his heart has maddened with joy, and he compares the raindrops to coins. With a satisfied expression, he regarded the field of ripe corn with its flowers, draped in a curtain of rain. Now, when he looks at the field of his ripe corn, the corn that has flowers on it, draped in a curtain of rain, he was very happy. But suddenly, a strong wind began to blow. Lencho was shocked because after the rainfall, there was a hailstorm. Big pieces of ice began to fall from the sky. Along with the rain, very large hailstones began to fall. These truly did resemble new silver coins. Now, these pieces of hailstorm were actually bearing resemblance with new silver coins. But these pieces did not give Lencho any happiness or satisfaction because falling of hail meant the crop was going to destroy. The boys, exposing themselves to the rain, ran out to collect the frozen pearls. Innocent children, ignorant children did not know that these pieces of hail were going to destroy the crops of their family. "It's really getting bad now," exclaimed the man. "I hope it passes quickly." Lencho hoped that the situation would get better eventually, but it did not pass quickly. For an hour, the hail rained on the house, the garden, the hillside, the cornfield, on the whole valley. There was hail and hail. The field was white as if covered with salt. Not a leaf remained on the trees. The corn was totally destroyed. And this tells us that Lencho's hopes were badly shattered. The flowers were gone from the plants. They were crushed under the weight of the hail. Lencho's soul was filled with sadness. When the storm had passed, he stood in the middle of the field and said to his sons, "A plague of locusts would not have eaten that much, would have left more of this." He is extremely sad now. The hailstorm has completely destroyed the crop as well as the surrounding trees and plants. The corn, the ripe corn in the fields, that was a result of months of hard work of Lencho and his family, had completely destroyed. The flowers were gone too. Lencho was extremely sad. While he was grieving over the loss of the crop, he told his sons that even if there had been a plague of locusts in the fields, those locusts would have left more of the crop than this hailstorm had. The hail has left nothing. He told his sons, "This year we'll have no corn." Lencho was a sad soul. That night was a sorrowful one. Lencho's entire family was plunged into despair. All our work for nothing. There's no one who can help us. We'll all go hungry this year. Students, you need to understand that this growing of crops is not just for business, but it is also for sustenance. They need this crop to sustain themselves. They need this crop to eat their meals. The entire family is sad. Let us discuss the oral comprehension check. What did Lencho hope for? Lencho hoped for rainfall for his crops. Why did Lencho say the raindrops were like new coins? Because these raindrops were going to let the crop bloom. And this was the last rain that the crop needed. After the harvest, this crop would yield him a lot of money. So the raindrops were like new coins. Question 3. How did the rain change? The rain changed to hailstorm gradually. There were winds that blew, and then there were no raindrops but hailstorm that came down. What happened to Lencho's fields? Lencho's fields were destroyed completely. What were Lencho's feelings when the hail stopped? Lencho felt very disappointed. He knew that they were going to be hungry now. There would be no food for them. Let us continue. But in the hearts of all who lived in that solitary house in the middle of the valley, there was a single hope, help from God. For this poor family, there was no other resort now but the only resort of God. They hoped that God would send them some help, one way or the other way. The only thing the family could do was console each other now. Don't be so upset, even though this seems like a total loss. Remember, no one dies of hunger. This is how they consoled each other in this time of distress. That's what they say, no one dies of hunger. But Lencho, in the innermost core of his heart, knew that the future was not too rosy for them. All through the night, Lencho thought only of his one hope, the help of God, whose eyes, as he had been instructed, see everything, even what is deep in one's conscience. Conscience, the ability to tell what's right and what's wrong, the inner sense that helps us decide right and wrong. Lencho knew that God's help would definitely arrive because God knows everything, even what is there inside our hearts. Lencho was an ox of a man. He was an ox of a man. That tells us that he was very, very hardworking. He could do physical labor for hours and hours, working like an animal in the fields, but still he knew how to write. The following Sunday at daybreak, he began to write a letter which he himself would carry to town and place it in the mail. It was nothing less than a letter to God. Now let us look at this simple, innocent man. He thinks that he can write a letter to God as if God was some physical being present around us. He wants to send this letter to God, but he does not know his address. He just writes God on the envelope. God, he wrote. If you don't help me, my family and I will go hungry this year. I need 100 pesos in order to sow my field again and to live until the crop comes, because the hailstorm ellipses. In the letter, students, you can see, he urges God to help him and his family, because if God did not help them, his family would go hungry that year. He wrote that he needed 100 pesos in order to sow my field again. In order to sow his field, he needed 100 pesos, and also to live until the next crop can be grown and harvested. He wrote to God on the envelope, put the letter inside, and still trouble went to the town. At the post office, he placed a stamp on the letter and dropped it into the mailbox, hoping that the letter would reach its destination. One of the employees, who was a postman and also helped at the post office, went to his boss, laughing heartily, and showed him the letter to God. It was natural for anyone else to laugh at this display of extreme hopefulness, because this was more unusual than usual. Never in his career as a postman had he known that address. After all, who had ever sent a letter to God himself? However, the postmaster, who was his superior, had a better sense prevailing. The postmaster was a fat and amiable fellow that tells us that he was a satisfied, a happy, and a friendly man. The postmaster, though sensible, broke out laughing, but almost immediately he turned serious and tapping the letter on his desk, commented, "What faith! I wish I had the faith of the man who wrote this letter, starting up a correspondence with God." Students, we should always remember that faith can move mountains. And if we see somebody so hopeful like Lencho, we should always respect their hope and faith. So did this postmaster. So, in order not to shake the writer's faith in God, the postmaster came up with an idea. He was not a man who would not take this seriously. He took this letter very seriously and also wanted to answer this letter. Now we know that, of course, that the letter could never reach God, but it reached the postmaster, and the postmaster wants to help the writer of this letter, that is Lencho. So he would help Lencho by sending him the money and signing the letter as God. But when he opened it, it was evident that to answer it, he needed something more than goodwill. When the postmaster opened the letter, he understood that Lencho did not just need an answer, he also needed something more. That is, money. So, more than goodwill, ink, and paper, money was needed. When he found that he would have to help the writer of this letter by sending some money, the postmaster did not back off. He still stuck to his resolution. He asked for money from his employees, so they contributed each what they could. He himself gave part of his salary, and several friends of his were obliged to give something for an act of charity. It was impossible for him to gather together the 100 pesos, so he was able to send the farmer only a little more than half, that means more than 50 pesos. They could not collect 100 pesos, so he just put in the envelope all that he could collect from the post office employees and his friends. He put the money in an envelope addressed to Lencho, and with it a letter containing only a single word as a signature: God. He signed the letter as God. Let us discuss the oral comprehension check. Who or what did Lencho have faith in? Lencho had extreme faith in the power of God. What did he do? He wrote a letter to God asking for 100 pesos for sowing of crop and for passing the time until the next harvest came up. Who read the letter? The postmaster, and the postman read the letter. What did the postmaster do then? He called upon his colleagues, employees, and friends to collect some money for an act of charity so that the writer of the letter could be helped in some way or the other. A week's time passed, and Lencho went to the post office again to find out if God had sent him a letter in return. The following Sunday, Lencho came a bit earlier than usual to ask if there was a letter for him. It was the postman himself who handed the letter to him, while the postmaster, experiencing the contentment of a man who has performed a good deed, looked on from his office. He was very satisfied and contented because he had helped Lencho by sending him whatever money he could collect. Lencho received the letter and he opened the letter in such a matter of fact way as if he had already known that God was going to send him money. His faith was so strong that he knew there would be some money inside. Lencho showed not the slightest surprise on seeing the money. Such was his confidence. He knew that the letter would not be without money, but he became rather angry when he counted the money. God could not have made a mistake. God knows his calculations well, nor could he have denied Lencho what he had requested. Immediately, Lencho went up to the window to ask for paper and ink because he would now write a letter to God again. He had not found 100 pesos in the letter. He wanted the full sum of money he had asked for. On the public writing table, he started to write. He wanted to complain against what had happened, with much wrinkling of his brow. There was so much of tension on his forehead, caused by the effort he had to make to express his ideas. He was not a very well educated man, so he had to struggle to express his ideas. When he finished, he went to the window to buy a stamp which he licked and then affixed it onto the letter's envelope. He pasted the stamp on the envelope with a blow of his fist. The moment the letter fell into the mailbox, the postmaster went to open it. The postmaster was eager to know what Lencho had written now. Did he thank God for what he received? Or did he complain that the money was not enough? He opened the letter. It said, God, of the money that I asked for, only 70 pesos reached me. So, as the postmaster had collected just more than half, there was only 70 pesos inside. And Lencho had not thanked God, but rather complained with a lot of dissatisfaction in his tone. He told God, send me the rest. I want the remaining 30 pesos also, since I need it very much. But don't send it to me through the mail, because the post office employees are a bunch of crooks. Students, you understand that this is an irony. We know that the post office staff themselves, under the leadership of the postmaster, had helped Lencho in the best way they could. And Lencho, on the contrary, calls them crooks, as if they had stolen 30 pesos from the 100 that he supposed was sent by God. And then he signed the letter with his name, Lencho. Oral comprehension check. Was Lencho surprised to find a letter for him with money in it? He was not surprised in the least. His confidence in the power of God was so much that he had almost expected to receive 100 pesos itself. What made him angry? When he found that there was only 70 pesos in the letter and 30 pesos were absent from the letter. He was angry. He thought the post office staff had stolen 30 pesos from the envelope. Thinking about the text, who does Lencho have complete faith in? Lencho has complete faith in the power of God. Which sentences in the story tell you this? There are many sentences in the story that tell us this. This is an exercise for you. Locate these sentences. Why does the postmaster send money to Lencho? The postmaster sent money to Lencho because he did not want to shake his faith in God. Why does he sign the letter God? He signed the letter God because he wanted Lencho to believe that the money had been sent by God. And he wanted Lencho to continue showing this faith in God. Did Lencho try to find out who had sent the money to him? He never tried to find out that because he was so sure that God helps all those people who seek his help. Who does Lencho think has taken the rest of the money? Lencho thinks that the post office staff had taken the rest of the money. What is the irony in this situation? Children, this is situational irony. The irony is that the one who actually helped Lencho was thought of as being crooks by Lencho himself. They were the ones who were Lencho's benefactors. But Lencho, on the other hand, blamed them for the missing 30 pesos from the envelope.